would like to welcome Professor Guido Almeida, who will take part this morning, and afterwards we will have this discussion about lying to remember. So it's a great honor for me that you be here with us this morning. We finished yesterday, I think, with Roman 9, and if we didn't anyway, we should remember that we are in the introduction to the doctrine of virtue, and Kant arrived in Roman 9 at a point in which he found or claimed to have found the supreme principle of the doctrine of virtue. And this is special just because here, as compared with other versions of the categorical imperative, he's not talking about a categorical imperative, but about a supreme principle. But the supreme principle is expressed in a way of a categorical imperative. And what is special about this version is that it talks about ends and that it talks about maxims. So the idea is act in accordance with the maxim of ends. He's not talking about the form of nature, of a law in general. He's not talking about the kingdom of ends as he does in the groundwork, and he's not talking about humanity being an end in itself. He's talking about ends, that it can be a universal law for everyone to have, and we have seen that there are two different kinds of ends, which are given to us by pure practical reason. And the first one is the promotion of the happiness of others, and the second one is the perfection of oneself. So it is our duty to promote both ends. But, and that seems to be a problem of, so to speak, philosophical comprehension of what's going on here. He claimed at the beginning of the introduction that not all our duties are duties of ends. So there are some duties which are not duties of ends. That is to say, this general principle, this supreme principle of the doctrine of virtue does not comprehend all kinds of duties. Only those duties which regard the two ends given to us by pure reason itself. This is the first remarkable thing, and the second remarkable thing is that he claims to give a deduction for it, a kind of justification which does not amount to a full proof. And what is remarkable here is that pure reason herself wants us to improve our practical rationality in general. So not only our ability to act morally and to choose moral ends, but to improve our practical rationality in general. So this is a small written practical rationality. It's not the big one which has its root in pure practical reason. It means that pure practical reason really shares your ability to behave in the world like you would like to behave in the world, to choose ends whatever you want to. This might be expressed by the principle of maximizing reason, so to speak, maximizing our capability of choosing ends whatsoever. And this is explained here, what the relation of a human being to himself and others can be an end, and this end is the subjective ends we have, is an end for pure practical reason itself. So if you decide to become a biologist, pure practical reason says, well, that's fine with me, do that. Within the bounds of the moral law, so to speak. So the moral law describes the boundaries of choosing ends in the field of subjective ends. So everything is fine with me. It's not only fine with me, it's good to do. So if you choose to become world-orientated, so to speak, to investigate the world, pure reason will say to you, yes, good choose. That's good to do. Don't become a Buddhist. Don't don't become Taoist, and don't choose to do nothing. Don't choose to be finding your happiness in silence, so to speak. Don't try to give up yourself, like Buddhists would like. So this is maybe if there is an opponent of this basic, a fundamental opposition to this kind of philosophy, it's a philosophy of no self, so to speak. This is a philosophy of being the master of the world, of yourself, so the exploration. So the Spanish would like that. Yeah, go to the Americas. Go to the Americas and see what you can find there. Kant would say, yeah, do that. But be aware, if you find human beings there, then you have to take account of that. You cannot treat them as a mere means to your ends. So far so good. And then you find in Roman 10 a discussion which is not of relevance to us here about analytic and synthetic. It will take you another book. We are now discussing a little bit Roman 10, concepts of what is presupposed on the part of feeling by the mind's receptivity to concepts of duty as such, and you find it here. And this seems to be a little bit surprising. If you just read the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, you find, so to speak, this sensibility and feeling and desire and all of that in two different forms in the groundwork. The one is it comes with inclination, and the other one is you have the feeling of respect. And now he seems to open up the field of moral feelings and something which is connected to that here in the Doctrine of Virtue to a large extent. He says it's not just the feeling of respect which is of importance for acting morally, but we have to presuppose some other kinds of aesthetic receptivity as a precondition for people to act morally. So now I stop talking and now it's up to you. What it is all about. The first sentence says, there are certain moral endowments such that anyone lacking them could have no duty to acquire them. What does that mean? There's no obligation to have these, etc. Why not? Why is there no obligation to have the feeling of respect, for instance? What do you think? It's a sentiment. What does it mean?
Yes, that means linked to sensibility.
And why can you not be put under obligation to have certain sentiments or capacities of certain sentiments?
They are natural.
They are natural, that's the point. It's part of your, so to speak, natural or moral history. If you have no capacities for something, then you cannot have the duty to have these capacities. Either you have this capacity or you don't have that capacity. If you have a capacity, for instance, for seeing something, then you can be put under obligation to make use of it. But if you have not the ability to see something because your ears are damaged, your eyes are damaged, then you cannot be put under obligation to make use of it. So the idea is you can only be put under obligation with regard to capacities you really have. So cultivation of your capacities means that you can be obligated to cultivate your capacities, but you cannot be obligated to have the capacities at all. If you have no capacity to smell something, then you cannot be obligated to smell something. It doesn't make sense. You cannot be obligated to move like a bird through the air. It doesn't make sense because it's impossible for you. And birds cannot be obligated to listen to lectures of philosophy. You know, there was this strange habit, still existed sometimes in the 19th century, to put animals to death penalty. There was, for instance, an elephant killing a child or whatever was hanged, and there was this kind of practice, for instance, in France before the French Revolution, or maybe later on, I don't know. There was this practice in England and maybe in Germany, I can't remember. So, to our conception of imputation and responsibility, it doesn't really make sense, because an animal is not responsible for what the animal is doing, because it has no reflection, free will, whatsoever, but there was this institution. So to Kantian conceptions, it doesn't make sense, of course. You cannot sanction animals as a moral being, because these animals do not have reason and will and so on and so forth. So anyway, Kant's idea is to make the story go, you need to have some capacities of feeling in general, and you cannot be, and they are the preconditions of being under obligation, but you cannot be under obligation to have these capacities. And now the second question would be, why are these capacities necessary? In which respect are these capacities necessary to be moral or to act moral?
Or another question is,
One.
why not these capacities are purely rational?
Why not pure rational? Because they have, what's the answer? What would it mean for a capacity to be purely rational? What capacity is only purely rational?
It could not be human.
Reason and understand.
Reason itself.
Yeah,
Reason itself. Reason itself is purely rational insofar as pure reason is the origin or the source or the ground of certain concepts. Only concepts can be purely rational. There are pure intuitions as well, space and time and so on and so forth. But only reason and intuition to some extent can be purely rational. But feeling can never be purely rational. It's a definition of feeling that it's not rational. It's irrational. It's the other side of rationality.
Why we need the feeling?
Why do we need a feeling for doing moralism? That's the question, yes.
In the third critique, Kant says that the beautiful sentiment is propedeutic to morals.
To morals.
To a moral
Yes.
feeling.
To a moral feeling. But why do we need moral feeling? Do we need them to know our duties?
Yeah.
Do we need feeling to know our duties? Didn't you know your duties before having certain feelings against other human beings? Doesn't seem so. You have the categorical imperative, you have your maxims, and then something formally is going on. You say whether or not the maxim contradicts itself, and so on. And it seems to be purely rational. So to know what your duties are, you do not seem to need some sorts of feelings. It's different from the Scottish science philosophers. They would say, if you don't feel the difference between torture being bad and giving good to people in distress being good, then there will be no difference between good and bad. That's the idea of the moral taste. The moral taste says there's a difference between good and bad because it feels different. If you torture me, everybody will be upset, I hope. Upset means it's bad because you feel bad. But not every form of feeling of being upset means that you are right in claiming that it is bad. You have to take a certain perspective on the situation. The perspective of what especially Adam Smith called impartiality. So you have to look on the situation from the perspective of an impartial spectator. And only then will you have feelings which can be claimed to be, so to speak, objective, right. But if you take the perspective of partiality, of you being heard or whatever, then it's no morally correct feeling, so to speak. Before court, you will be upset, of course, it's you which is sentenced to jail or whatever. And you say, oh, this is unjust because now I feel bad, I have to go to jail, and so on and so forth. But looking on the situation from a impartial perspective, you might say, are they alright because I did something wrong? I killed somebody, or didn't pay the fee, or I didn't listen carefully to the lectures of the professor and so forth. Something.
Patricia, I would say that the aesthetics education is education for form. If you only read the world as a material world, for instance, if I am hungry, I want to eat some food, that means material things, I have to. But aesthetics feeling are not material. We are not interested in the material things. We can be touched only by the form of the things. And then I think the form can educate, can cultivate. We are only prepared for moral, in the point of view of the third critique, we are only prepared for moral after being touched by the form of the things. Not interested.
The form of the face?
The things.
The things.
Yes. If we can see the things without interest, without moral interest, and without also sensibility.
I mean, it's interesting to talk about forms, because there's this idea that forms itself do not affect.
Yes.
But obviously in aesthetics is all about the forms of the objects. And so now the question is, how can it be the case that something which is not directly possible, namely that forms affect people, so the sensibility nevertheless affects it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the idea is, here are the forms of the object, of the aesthetic object.
Yes.
Then I'm reflecting about this object. And then it causes something in me which is not directly a feeling,
Yes.
but something which matches this form,
Yes.
namely something formless.
Yes.
So the paradox is, Kant in the third critiques is the king of paradoxes. He really creates a lot of paradoxes. He likes it. And so the idea is, here's the form of the object. I reflect about nature and so on and so on. That creates in me, or causes, so to speak, in me something being formless, namely a free play between the faculties of my understanding and imagination. And this formlessness of the play, the free play, the non-determined play of the faculty, is accompanied with a feeling.
Yes.
And this feeling is the basis of judging that the object is beautiful. So you have form, something which is without form, contradicts the idea of form, and the feeling accompanying it or being aroused by it, and then you claim something which has a form, namely judgment. Judgments are always some expression which comes with a form. You say, this is beautiful. And this is meant to attach in you the same kind of judgment, so to speak. And then you are reflecting on it and so on and so forth. And you hope that you and me and everybody joins in this judgment.
Because form is universal.
Form is
universal.
Forms universal.
And the material is always
Particular, subjective.
Particular and subjective.
Yeah. So, and now the paradox is that something which is purely subjective, namely my feeling, my aesthetic feeling, becomes the basis of claiming something, so to speak, objective, namely that it is beautiful. Although we know that objects are not beautiful, but the beauty isn't a property of the world, so to speak. We project it on it, but in a different way as Jung would do. So now maybe the same problem here arises. There are the concepts of rationality, and they say, well, it's good to act on this maxim, and so on and so forth. And now the question is, where come feeling in? And he says, well, in general, without moral feeling, the feeling of respect, what would be the case? We wouldn't take earnest the voice of pure reason, so to speak. So the insight of pure reason into our duties and obligation must cause in us some feeling, must affect, so to speak, our sensibility. Must affect us as a human being, because as human beings we are not just rationality, but more than that. We call it, remember, rational, natural subject, something like that. Vernünftiges Naturwesen, rational, national subject, so something paradoxical. A subject living in nature being rational at the same time. So now the question is, so why do we need this feeling? I would say not so much is the wrong expression, not for understanding what our duties are, but it must have a relation with same motivation in the way in which we get involved into moral situation and something like that. It must have to do with our subjectivity, with being us, being human, and the relation of being human to the voice of pure rationality and so on and so forth. So he says here, to have these predispositions can be considered a duty, rather every human being has them. So he claims, as a matter of fact, everybody has these capacities. And you can disclaim that, of course, because this is an empirical claim. You could say, I know my neighbor hasn't these capacities. He has no moral feelings, and so on. Maybe Hitler had no one. He had no consciousness. He had no compassion whatsoever. He was driven by his crazy concepts, and so on and so forth. So this is a question whether or not there are people who are immoral, or maybe amoral. So the immoral person may be defined as a person which, although he or she knows what's good and bad, wants to be bad. That's the immoral person. I know I shouldn't betray you, but I do. I know I shouldn't lie, but I will do so. I know I shouldn't hurt you, but I will do so. And the amoral person is, so to speak, a person who doesn't know what you are talking about using moral words. Maybe this is Nietzsche, or the Nietzschean picture of the world. That is to say, what you are distinguishing between good and bad, I don't know what that means. Seems to be a story connected with Christianity. I don't know, interesting. But I have no concepts about that, I have no feelings about that. You can't claim this person is impossible, as a matter of fact. Okay, to read it again. To have these predispositions cannot be considered a duty, rather every human being had them, and it is by virtue of them that he can be put under obligation. Wow! The idea is without these feelings, you wouldn't be able to put under obligation. It's a precondition to be put under obligation. Consciousness of them is not of empirical origin. Wow, what does that mean? Not empirical consciousness of the predispositions of being the object of obligation. Instead, only follow from consciousness of a moral law as the effect this has on the mind. That sounds as a reference to the second critique. You know, the idea of the second critique is that's, so to speak, a fact of consciousness, a fact of pure reason. So we have a consciousness of the moral law, and the consciousness of the moral law is identical with having the consciousness of moral obligation, and because of this consciousness, we we know of our freedom, because freedom is the principium essendi of the consciousness of the moral law. If you have the moral law, then you have freedom, because without freedom there is no moral law. And this is standard conviction between Leibniz and Kant. No law without freedom. But you know, I told you there is a debate about what this freedom means, of course. Both, if you can start, so to speak, with the concept of the moral law and the consciousness of it, and it implies freedom. But you could also put it the other way around. You could start with the idea of freedom, and then the consciousness of the moral law, or the moral law is implied. To put it in a nutshell, in the groundwork, Kant seems to start with the idea of freedom, and then he has the moral law. And in the Critique of Practical Reason, he might start with the consciousness of the moral law, and then freedom is implied. And the Critique of Practical Reason might be an answer to critics who claim that they do not know what Kant is talking about using the concept of freedom in the groundwork. Because some Wolffians criticize Kant in the Kant's groundwork for not making clear what the relation there is between his specific concept of freedom and moral obligation, because they don't believe in Kant's conception of freedom. They said, I have no idea. Like the guy called Pistorius. He was a priest, a Protestant priest on a German big island. Big means a big German island, means a very small South American island. And he was quite smart. He was trained in the Wolffian tradition, and he wrote some of the most interesting Pistorius reviews of Kant's work, of the groundwork and of the Critique of Practical Reason, and so on and so forth. And he says, well, Kant is a nice guy and he's smart and so on and so forth, but he didn't make clear what the concept of freedom is really all about. And maybe Kant in the Critique of Practical Reason tries to answer his criticism by changing the game of argumentation, not starting with the idea of freedom, but with something which with a concept, namely the concept of the moral law, which Pistorius didn't criticize. So Pistorius, of course, claimed as Kant that there is a moral law, that we have a consciousness of freedom. And therefore he says, okay, if you don't believe me, if you don't believe in the idea of freedom as I understand it, then let's start with the concept of the consciousness of the moral law. And then you will see that it implies my conception of it. So anyway, going back to this passage, our question is, what function exactly do these aesthetic preconceptions have for morality? And then he distinguishes between four: moral feeling, conscience, love of man, and respect. These are the aesthetic preconditions. Sounds a little bit like the transcendental aesthetic in the Critique of Pure Reason, you see. He starts there saying, first of all, we have to look at the theory of space and time. And then we can introduce pure concepts. And then we can know how these concepts can have objective reality. Here in the introduction, he started with pure concepts, so to speak. He started with categorical imperative. He started with the maxim of the doctrine of virtue. But then, in the second step, he introduced the idea of aesthetics. So aesthetics being not the precondition for understanding what's going on in morality, but something which follows after we have fixed up, at least on a primitive level, the concept of pure practical reason. But without this aesthetic dimension, moral philosophy wouldn't work, so to speak. The doctrine of virtue. So, last time, what's going on in moral feeling? What does moral feeling mean to Kant? Starting here. And now you spent the whole evening and night reading Kant very intensively yesterday, saying, no, my dear friends, I have no time. Dancing, drinking, looking TV. I have to put the time. Because it's my duty. K13. Then we make the Buddhist ceremony. I learned it here. Making money in silence.
This kind of moral feeling is some kind of feeling that you have only after.
Very good. Very, very good. Why is it important for Kant to strengthen this point? And he was talking about that point before. Do you remember that? At the very beginning, talking about the faculty of desire and so on and so forth. So you see he's repeating himself. It's something he thinks is of importance, and the reader might miss the repeats, and maybe had no time to put things in a good order. So only afterwards, what does it mean? So here are your concepts. Here is your moral consciousness, your moral law, and your will, power of choice, and so on and so forth. And you are in a decision to decide whether or not you want to do your duty. How come moral feeling in? Only afterwards. Only you have said, yes, I will do my duty. And then you will feel pleasure afterwards. This is, you might know that this idea of the function of pleasure accompanies moral philosophy since ancient times. For instance, if you look at Aristotle, the idea is, if there is a necessary connection between virtue and happiness, as Aristotle claims, do you do the virtuous actions because you want to be happy? Or do you do the virtuous action because it's virtuous and then true happiness comes in? And maybe Aristotle believes in the second thing. He says, the virtuous people does the virtuous action just because it's virtuous, and then happiness comes in. If you do the virtuous actions as a means to become happy, then you won't really feel true happiness. And this seems to be a little bit similar. So you feel good after you have done your duty, but you do not do your duty because you do want to feel good afterwards. If that would be the case, then the moral feeling is in danger to be the motive for your action. But if it is a motive of your action, then it would mean that you do not do the good action, the virtuous action, because it's virtuous, but because you do want to sleep well during the night. You do not want to be upset about being a bad guy during daylight, so to speak. So he claims afterwards you will be rewarded, or so to speak, not being rewarded in doing the moral work, so to speak. But this is unavoidable to have this kind of feeling. But the feeling is not the object of your striving, so to speak.
Heiner, you can say that the happiness of the feeling of pleasure is the effect of the duty and not the cause
That's
of the
yes.
duty.
But the question would be, maybe you are a special person, maybe you are a person who knows everything about what's going on in moral philosophy, but unfortunately you do not feel this feeling as the effect of having acted morally. What would be missing? What would be missing, so to speak? It's not your motive, it's not something you need for distinguishing between good and bad. So what? Why is it? So why does Kant think it to be important to stress that we feel afterwards in a certain way? Or is it a wrong question? Maybe it's a wrong question because Kant would say, you are asking a question too many, so to speak, because it's a matter of fact. It's just a matter of fact. It's like a matter of fact. After you drank too much alcohol, the next day you will have, at least I have, it has some effect on my brain. So, and the way how I feel. I don't know. He says, you know, in the next paragraph, he talks about cultivation. And he said before there would be no obligation. The first one can only be cultivated, and to strengthen it through wonder at its inscrutable source. This comes about by it's being shown how it is set apart from any pathological stimulus. So this is, it's not about motivation, and is induced most intensely in its purity by a merely rational representation. So, why is it necessary for the concept of obligation to have this feeling? Since any consciousness of obligation depends upon moral feeling to make us aware of the constraint present in the sort of duty, there can be no duty to have moral feeling or to acquire it. So go back to the question, what does this feeling which you will have after you have acted morally be a presupposition for being under obligation? This is
I think Schiller has a very nice formula to understand this passage. I don't know. Because he divides the human existence in three states, three kinds of states. When the child is born, he is physical, then he has sensibility. He has a material sensibility.
Okay, pathological.
Yes, pathological sensibility, feeling of pleasure. Because even animals have feeling of pleasure and displeasure. A dog, when it eats, it has a feeling of pleasure, of course. Then the child is like an animal and that has this physical feeling of pleasure and displeasure. But then it's the second state of the human existence is exactly the static states. But only after the third state is only the moral state. Then we have to pass through the static state to get to the moral state. And what means to pass through the aesthetic state is to can be able to divide form and material. And then if you achieve to separate form from material, you are able to obey, for instance, the law, because the law is only form, it's not material. Material is the part of the maxim. The law has only the form of objectivity. Then to be prepared to obey the law, you have to pass through this transformation to be capable to divide material and form. Because if you are only interested in material, you are not able to obey the law, because you have the only. Oh, it's
I think you're on the right track, so to speak, because he's talking about cultivation.
Yeah.
And so moral feeling at the beginning is not moral feeling, so to speak. It's an obstacle of your acting morally. So you have to overcome these feelings because they are part of your natural history, they are pathological and so on and so forth. But so to speak, if you manage to overcome them, or in overcoming them, these feelings or some of these feelings are transformed to something different. They have a different color now. They are not the color of a nature which is an obstacle to your moral striving, but something which accompanies your moral striving or will make you feel good after you did your moral job, so to speak. And insofar, I think it's the idea, it's more easier for you to do the moral job if you cultivated your pathological feelings into moral feelings, because then after your moral action you will have special feeling as well, namely the special feeling of being content with yourself and so on and so forth. Something like that. I mean, he's not very specific here about that. But so you can say you need this kind of feeling for obligation, because without feeling accompanying your inclinations, inclinations as such are not feelings. You have to be aware about that. Inclinations are desires, and Kant distinguishes between the faculty of desire and the faculty of feeling. Sometimes people don't take care about that. So feelings as such are not desires, but desires are accompanied with feelings. So the idea is your natural feelings being transformed, so to speak, from being connected with your natural desires in being now connected with your pure rationality. So this is a kind of changing perspective, so to speak. So feelings as such, Kant, you remember the passage where Kant says there are feelings without desire, but every desire comes with a feeling. That's the very beginning of the book. So inclinations are not feelings. They are accompanied with the feelings. There are no inclinations without feelings, but they are not identical with them because they belong to the faculty of desire. And there's a higher one, the lower one, and so on and so forth. So this is one story, that feelings come in with your sensibility, and that you have to cultivate them, transform them, to make them more closely connected maybe to the faculty of pure rationality than they were before, and then it's getting maybe easier to overcome your inclinations if they are hindrances of your moral striving and so on and so forth. And there's a second motive to talk about moral feelings, and this becomes clear here, namely to make clear that when Kant talks about moral feelings, he's not talking about a moral sense. So moral sense here means the theory of the Scottish philosophers, Hutcheson especially. So Hume, Hume sometimes regarded as being a moral sense philosopher, and of course he is, but there's a difference between Hume and Hutcheson, in that Hume wouldn't be very much reluctant claiming that there's a new special moral sense, so to speak, and Hutcheson introduces that as the seventh sense, so to speak, hearing, smelling, and so forth, and a moral sense. But in Hume, moral sense just more means a special way of reacting to certain situations that feel different. So to speak. And here Kant claims, well, be aware that I'm not a moral sense theorist. If you would, the moral sense would be at the same time the basis of distinguishing between good and bad and motivating us. Okay, that was the first one. Then conscience. Be conscience. Gewissen. Well, of course, a reader of the 18th century, first of all, would think maybe about the Christian conception of conscience, Gewissen. And the question, there are different conceptions of conscience in German philosophy at that day. And the question is what Kant is, why Kant does discuss the concept of conscience here. And it comes with duty as well. We have this Genza, knowledge in it. You have the word knowledge in it. So how come knowledge? There are some philosophers who claim conscience is nothing else than being assured of your moral duties. Nothing else than that. And others claim that conscience is, so to speak, a special faculty which gives you direct knowledge of special obligations or something like that. Obligations stemming directly from God, for instance. So it's the voice of God inside you. And you find the second one in Crusius. So Crusius might claim that conscience is, and in Baumgarten, conscience is something special, not to be identified with the normal moral knowledge people might have. And Kant seems to claim that conscience more or less is identical with what pure reason tells us are our moral obligations. So conscience is not something which adds to our knowledge of our duties. It's not meant. And therefore he says there is no what's called erring conscience. So you have that here. I shall here pass over the various divisions of conscience, and not only that, as follows from what has been said, an erring conscience is an absurdity. So in medieval times, the people were talking about that, and you are justified in following your conscience, although it's erring, just because it's a conscience, and so on and so forth. You can say, no, because you have pure practical reason, and pure practical reason gives you knowledge of what is good and bad. There is no way of introducing something besides pure practical reason being the source of knowledge or erring knowledge of what's good and bad in mind. So the question here again is what function the conscience does have within the Kantian theory. And the answer, I think, is to be found in the last paragraph. One of the answers. The duty here is only to cultivate one's conscience, to sharpen one's attentiveness to the voice of the inner judge, and to use every means to obtain a hearing for it. Hence the duty is only indirect. So what does it mean? What is conscience? Inner judge is, of course, one of the central concepts you find in Adam Smith. He talks about reason being the inner judge. It identifies reason and the inner judge. So if you are impartial, that means you judge yourself from a neutral perspective, impartial perspective. And this perspective is the perspective Smith also names reason. So there's some stoicism in him as well. Remember Keynes, Lord Keynes, the first name. So Keynes and Smith are more on, a little bit more, they are more on the rationalistic side than Hume and Hutcheson, maybe, especially as Hume. Hume so within the school, so to speak, of moral sense philosophers, Hume always has some extreme, so to speak, position. And he doesn't like the idea of reason at all, and so on and so forth. But Smith, and Keynes are much more maybe inclined to accept a certain conception of reason, which is not the reason of rationalism, but is something which is not just subjective feeling, it's more than that.
Can we say that cultivate our consciousness, that means that we get rid of our egoism? Egoism. And be able to put ourselves in the place of other.
Yes, that's the idea of the inner judge. The inner judge means to transcend, so to speak, this partial perspective of your being a human being, so to speak. This is to try to be impartial, like a good judge. The good judge on court is a judge who judges impartially. He would say, oh, you are my son, I'm sorry for that, but as a judge I must say you have to go to jail because you broke the law or something like that. So it's be you loving your son or loving your daughter and then must say, but unfortunately, I have to put you in jail. So it's a hard, sometimes hard to do. This is impartiality. Kant uses sometimes, more or less in passing, this word impartiality or being impartial, but you find it in the groundwork. Kant read Hume and a little bit of Hutcheson, and he was impressed by Adam Smith. Adam Smith's moral philosophy appeared, I think it was in 1758, the theory of moral sentiments, and it was published in German translation in 1770. So 12 years later, which was quite exceptional, but because normally British and French philosophy was translated within a year or 2 years, maybe in the same year, like it was the case with Rousseau. And Kant read it, we know that, and he was fascinated by Adam Smith because he realized that Adam Smith is, so to speak, on the right track. There is he's more near to him than just maybe Hume because of his, a little bit of rationality stronger in Adam Smith than it is in Hume. He was fascinated by it. And he took over some of his conceptions. On the other side, Inner Judge also appeared in Baumgarten's Ethics, at least at 1 or 2 places. But Baumgarten doesn't seem to make much of it, so to speak. And I have no idea about whether or not Baumgarten read Adam Smith, I don't know. Maybe nobody knows that. But anyway, so Inner Judge, you think about you reminded of Adam Smith.
Heiner, a question. If moral consciousness cannot be acquired, it's enough.
It's there.
Then Kant can also consider that some kind of pathology that someone
Of
born
course, yeah.
without,
Yes, without
or
yeah.
it's a pathology.
It's a
As
pathology.
with someone
Yeah.
born blind, then someone can.
So, yes, so to speak. Then you would say he is not in use of his power of freedom, so to speak. It could be that people are, so to speak, not in the use of the healthy reason. That's another expression he always uses in the anthropology lecture and one of his political papers. He talks about healthy reason. Healthy reason means to be able to follow rules and so on and so forth. It's important for his conception of enlightenment, overcoming of prejudices and so on and so forth. But he wouldn't be reluctant to say maybe your neighbor, so to speak. You shouldn't suppose that maybe your neighbor or me or so doesn't have it. He would say the normal picture is that everybody in this room, everybody I can communicate with, so to speak. He's not ill in hospital or whatever, has the ability to have that. Because, it's identified with Inner Judge. So, to some extent, everybody has in it, even the worst guy, this idea, this institution, this capacity to judge himself or herself of what he or she has done. And in the groundwork it says even a bad guy, after he has done the bad action, will reflect on the action and comes to the conclusion that it was bad. Optimistic picture of human beings.
I think you said to Patricia that it is a possibility that some people don't have moral consciousness. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, that was maybe too strong. Kant in the anthropology lecture says there might be the possibility that some people are not in the use of making, not in the position to make use of their freedom, but normally, so to speak, people are. The healthy human being has this kind of consciousness. Even Hitler, he was there.
I remember a passage in the ground Heiner says that moral feeling is the only feeling that we can a priori know
Yeah,
that we have,
yeah.
provided that we have reason
Yes,
and the capacity of having
yes,
feeling.
yes. But
Then it is not possible.
it's not possible. If you have pure reason, then you have this feeling. But there might be people who do not have pure reason, so to speak, because they are ill, maybe parts of the brains are missing or whatever.
But if they have
If they have, you have feeling.
If they have feelings, the capacity of feeling, and the capacity of thinking, they have to have moral feeling.
That's true. But you could imagine a human being who has the capacity to do mathematics and maybe is an engineer or whatever, but and he has rationality, but it's, so to speak, the rationality of our understanding of hypothetical imperatives, not the highest part of the higher faculty of rationality, so to speak. This is the example he gives of devils in the Tauber's Perpetual Peace. He says, even for devils, it must be possible to solve the problem of overcoming war and go into the state of freedom just because they find utilitarian arguments to leave the natural state. Because, in the natural state, like in Hobbes, life isn't that easy. And if you think about a better situation, then you will think about making a treaty with other people, say, if you don't hurt me, I won't hurt you, and we will create a state, and Patricia will be our governor, and she will decide who will give the law, and so on and so forth, and then we can live in security, and everybody is better off because, you can make treatises and so on and so forth, but this has nothing to do with morality. So we can imagine that. But for real human beings, he would say, of course, they have pure reason, and therefore they have this feeling, because if there is pure reason, then a priori it's true that that pure reason will cause in us some feeling. But this is a feeling of respect and conscience and moral feeling and sea love of man seem to be different from the feeling of respect he's talking about this in the ground field, although they are a priori as well, so to speak. In the ground field, you only has this feeling of respect. And this feeling of respect comes before the action. Without having feeling of respect for the moral law, as I told you yesterday, people wouldn't care about pure reason at all. They would say, oh, interesting to know. Oh, really? In China, there are new car production and so on. It wouldn't be of interest to you. So the feeling of respect has a special status. So maybe because of time reasons, we should go quickly to C and D to make our job done. Love of man. Yeah. Finally. Finally, it's all about love. Kind love. Love is a matter of feeling. Oh, wow! Even he knew. Even Kant knew that love is a matter of feeling.
There's no room for hate.
No room for it. Yeah.
Yes, there is.
Yeah. But hatred of man is always hateful. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yes. Actually, there is a debate about in the 18th century about the, not only in the 18th, of course, about the question how hateful a man can be. I told you about maybe the day before yesterday. And Kant didn't believe that people would be bad just to be shown to be bad. So if people are bad and hate other people, they always have, so to speak, a reason for it, namely their own happiness. Human beings are not beings who would sacrifice their own happiness just to harm other people. And in Hutcheson, for instance, that seems to be a possibility. Hutcheson says we can imagine some human beings who would be willing to sacrifice their own happiness just to make sure that the other guy will be hurt. So you are willing to go to jail just to make sure that the other one will be hurt too. I kill somebody, although I know that it will hurt myself in terms of making it impossible for me to feel good until the end of my life. And Kant would say that's not the true story about human beings. They have always a reason, either a reason which stems from pure rationality or from your sensibility, and sensibility, inclination means own happiness. Okay, so what about love? Love is a matter of feeling. Wow, even known at Königsberg. Huh? Not of willing. And I cannot love because I will to, still less because I ought to. So a duty to love is an absurdity. So that's it, isn't it? There can be no duty to love somebody. But how should this feeling of love be necessary for obligation? Do you remember? He claimed at the beginning of Romans 12 that all these feelings have a connection to obligation. But what about love? It has no relation to obligation. That's the story. You cannot be obligated to love somebody. And if you love somebody, love as such has no moral meaning. You cannot say, I do the morally good thing because I love somebody, because that is part of your natural history, I would say. But of course you can cultivate your loving feelings, which might make it easier to do the good job. You know, this is a discussion you find under the head of overdetermined actions, and it's a debate which goes back to Schiller and so on and so forth. The question is, isn't it bad luck for me if I do my duty not out of respect for the moral law, but because I love the people? And if I love somebody and I do what duty demands me to do, then my action is fine, but it has no inner moral worth. You find this argument in Schiller.